The Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in India for a two-day visit. He's due to hold talks with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Putin is hoping to increase sales of Russian oil, missile systems and fighter jets to India, as well as broaden trade links beyond energy and defence equipment. Their bilateral trade has increased five-fold since 2021, but India is facing US pressure to move away from Moscow. Let's talk about this with Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor of the Hindu newspaper and host of the WorldView foreign policy show. Welcome to DW. Can I start by asking you how significant the Russian president's visit to India is, especially in light of the US pressure on India to distance itself from Moscow?
Thank you, Anya. Yes, it is a significant visit, simply because this is his first visit to India since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Normally, this is an annual summit, once held in Delhi, once held in Moscow. And so they had to skip 2 years in between. Because of the war. So it's significant that he's coming at this time. It's also significant, as you said, the tightrope that New Delhi has to really walk over here, because while Russia is a tested partner, a very, very close friend, traditional ties there, and many things to discuss in this Modi-Putin visit. At the same time, the visit being watched, I'm sure, where you are, as well as in Washington, most European capitals, and the idea that they have to balance the fact that next month, possibly the German chancellor is expected in Delhi, the European Union's leadership is expected in Delhi, and both the US and the European Union are in the final stages of very crucial FTAs as well. So there's a bit of balance with Russia. India's traditional military hardware ties are important, nuclear, civil nuclear power, space cooperation, as well as the new areas of trade between the two, or the idea of labor mobility and signing an agreement tomorrow over that. And finally, really how the leaders will tackle the issue of Russian oil that India has now had to cut down on due to US sanctions, and how they will replace that very large amount in the India-Russia bilateral trade equation.
So lots of issues to discuss here. First of all, though, what signals do you think this visit sends to Washington?
Well, I think they're trying to send as little signals as possible on the New Delhi end, because each of these relationships is sensitive about the other. And for India and for Prime Minister Modi, he needs to ensure that each of them is seen as a bilateral relationship on its own. But I do think that the Russian president is making it clear that he is sending signals from here ahead of the visit. He gave an extensive interview to an Indian television channel. We've seen the Russian ambassador here as well, really criticizing Europe in particular for its stance on the Ukraine issue, and is likely to make some kind of statements while he's in Delhi as well. Anything he says will be crucial or important, given that there is this US peace proposal on the line, given that he's just met with US negotiators in Moscow, and given that India has tried very hard to at least present the case that the war needs to end.
You mentioned trade. Now, India, of course, is facing 50% tariffs from the US. Do you think this has played a role in pushing it to diversify and increase its trade with Russia beyond just oil imports?
You know, it works both ways, because this 50% is made up 25% of a tariff for India's decision to keep buying Russian oil. And now remember, before the war in Ukraine, India did not buy much Russian oil. Bilateral trade was about $10 billion. It has gone over the space of just 2 or 3 years to making up 40% of India's oil basket. And trade went from $10 billion to $69 billion last year. So that's a very, very large component. Now with US sanctions, that number has actually come down. The second part to the trade sanctions, the tariffs on India, is really about reciprocal tariffs. And there is an India-US trade FTA negotiation underway. I think there'll be another meeting next week, and they're hoping that by next month they do make some progress on it. I think the relationship with Russia has not so far been about trade, although you will see some parts, both sides trying very hard to increase that relationship through a new corridor that goes from the south of India to Vladivostok, to the east of Russia, carrying produce, processed goods, pharmaceuticals, apparel. Those are goods that India may have wanted to export to the US as well, but they've come under huge tariffs. But remember, the really crucial question is, will India also export goods like heavy machinery, equipment, tools that Europe still and the US believes are dual use?
How is Modi's image benefiting domestically from this visit by President Putin?
You know, it's interesting on most issues, and I did see your correspondence story earlier. On most issues, public sentiment really mirrors what the government is thinking at a certain time. I think in this case, though, one has to say that public sentiment is much ahead in terms of wanting to keep the Russia relationship. This is a traditional relationship. Russia has been seen as having India's back at a time when India didn't have as many friends. So there is no question that it helps Prime Minister Modi to show the country that this relationship is still on firm footing. There were many years in there where it wasn't on such firm footing between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, but now we see that personal relationship between the two. For the rest, I think it is important for India as well to show that it is asserting its strategic autonomy. So even if it does give up Russian oil, as it did in the past, give up Iranian oil, Venezuelan oil under US pressure, I think the government really wants to make the case that this visit, making sure it is a substantial visit, is part of India asserting that strategic autonomy.
Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor of The Hindu and host of the WorldView foreign policy show. Suhasini, thank you so much for joining us on DW.